Interviewing and counseling, negotiation, and litigation are all at their core about telling and understanding stories. Being aware of narrative structures and dynamics is a skill set that helps lawyers utilize the reciprocal nature of storytelling with clients. Understanding these structures enhances the representation, the client's sense of agency, and the lawyer's ability to translate the client's lived experience into a judicially recognized legal claim. For me, learning the structure and dynamics of client narratives helped me understand why I had difficulty connecting with some of my clients and, frankly, made me a better listener and storyteller in general. So although we are going to talk about these structural elements as they relate to client communications, remember that they're also critical in creating a case theory and engaging in advocacy. The first key in using narrative structure to connect with a client is understanding a client's steady state, the normal course of the client's life, the disruption of which has caused them to seek the assistance of a lawyer. Remember, your client's steady state may not align with you or a decision-maker's understanding of an ordinary life. You must be sensitive to the differences to understand your client's story and to legitimize your client's steady state to others. Many of us have noticed that when speaking with clients, the information they share with us is not always sequential. Paying attention to the narrative time, how a client accounts for time in their narrative, can provide clues as to how a client understands the issue and the details our client feels are important. We also pay attention to a client's stock stories, customary ways stories are framed. Sometimes this narrative tool provides helpful shortcuts, allowing a story to move forward. However, when listeners have different understandings of a stock story, their use can distort significant details. Being aware of when clients are using a stock story allows us to determine how a client feels about it, note unusual components that fall outside of the stock story for follow-up, and evaluate how the stock story affects how the client is telling their story and how we are hearing it. Of course, you want to make sure you identify the trouble, the problems, current or potential, that have caused the disruption to your client's steady state. You can then note how this trouble differs from a client's steady state, how the trouble affects narrative time, how the client sees their own role within the trouble, and who has agency. That is, who is causing the trouble and who is trying to stop it. Also, pay attention to redress and transformation. Your client made a number of decisions after the trouble and before coming to you as a way to address the situation. Look for decisions the client made about how to address the trouble before coming to you and the results. Do not mistake inaction for antipathy. The final important term, even as the concept may feel a bit esoteric, is the idea of teleology. Teleology is the act of using something's design or purpose to define it. So, for example, a teleological definition of a bird's wings is that wings are for flying. Another way to understand teleology is to think about it as a time-based way of explaining something's purpose. You describe something based on what it can or will do. When applied to the events in a person's life, teleology can be understood as the intersection of the facts making up the client's story with the desired result. Consequently, listening for the narrative structure of how a client tells their story helps to understand where a client may expect their story to end and where they want it to end. Knowing those things helps you take a more client-centered approach to determine a client's understanding of their legal rights, suss out client goals, and discuss alternative trajectories.
Bye. Created for the Disability Rights Law Clinic at American University, Washington College of Law. Created by Professor OK.